On the 24th of July 1926, a crowd gathered at Belle Vue in Manchester to watch dogs chase a mechanical hare around a new oval track. It was Britain's first greyhound race. There was money on the result, and there's been ever since. 100 years on, it's still running, and dogs have paid for every one of those years. Greyhounds are built for running, and they love it. They are long and lean and light, but running across a field and racing around an oval track aren't the same thing. So it's not really a question of do they love to run, it's whether they love to race. A racing greyhound runs at almost 40 miles an hour, around a tight bend and in a pack. This year alone, more than 700 of them have fallen during a race. Some never raced again, and most of us never even heard their names. This is Duna. She's an 8-year-old Spanish greyhound whom I fostered and later adopted. If being her guardian has taught me anything, it's that greyhounds are the most gentle, comfort-seeking, and graceful creatures to walk this earth. It's really no wonder to me that greyhounds used to be reserved for royalty. For centuries in England, owning one was a privilege of the nobility, and a commoner would be punished just for keeping one. It took barely a century of racing to turn a dog like that into a number inside a trap. One country after another has walked away from it. New Zealand runs its last race on the 31st of July. Wales and Scotland have both passed laws to ban it. In the United States, 44 states have outlawed it. So why are we still dragging our heels? On the podcast this week, I'm talking to representatives from 3 organisations who have banded together to end greyhound racing in the UK. Norb founded shutdown campaigns to take on every dog track in England. Isobel is a campaign manager at Animal Aid, the group digging into what happens to the dogs away from the track. And Emily's from the League Against Cruel Sports, the 100-year-old charity best known for fighting fox hunting, now turning to greyhounds. And on the 25th of July, 100 years after that first race in Manchester, they will be marching in London to end greyhound racing for good. This is Just a Dog podcast, and I'm your host, Nadine. And this is Duna. Let's begin. What's that? Duna's asked me to ask you, please subscribe. It helps other people find the show. Thanks. So nice to meet you guys. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having
Oh,
us.
it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I would love for you to introduce yourselves, tell me about your organization, how you got started within the organization, and then personal motivation for continuing the work that you do. Norb, shall we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I founded Shutdown Campaigns last year, around this time last year, actually, because I cared deeply about greyhounds and ending the racing of greyhounds. And I guess I have a lot of experience working with campaigners and volunteers on the ground. And I saw an opportunity to support people to campaign against their local dog tracks, because at the time we had, I think, 18 dog tracks left in England or something. We've now only got 15. But there was only a local campaign against a handful of those tracks. And now we've got a campaign against every single one. So that's kind of what I do, is I support people to campaign for the greyhounds that we all care so much about.
Amazing. And what did you do before?
A long history of working with animals, originally on the ground in sanctuaries and shelters, working with dogs, and then as a campaigner for organizations like Animal Rising, the Humane League, and not just dogs either, range of animals. So when I was at the Humane League, for example, they mostly focused on chickens. And when I was at Animal Rising, we did campaigns for animals confined to farms. We did campaigns against the racing of horses, and we did some stuff against the racing of greyhounds. And actually, when we did that stuff, I wanted to continue, but it wasn't kind of the priority or the strategic direction the organization was going in. And it's part of the reason I left and eventually set this up.
What was the thing that flicked a switch in your brain where you were just like, I've got to do this?
I don't know if there was any single moment, but I'd worked with greyhounds in the RSPCA. I got some greyhounds in from the racing industry, from a trainer called Rebecca Perkins, who within the industry, it's a well-known cruelty case. She basically just abandoned her dogs after the track she was attached to closed. And yeah, we ended up with those of her dogs that survived. There were more than 30, and not all of them did survive. And so I was aware of the racing industry, and I was aware of 3 tracks near my own house. And so I was like, okay, I'll campaign to shut down my 3 tracks. And then I was like, well, if there are 3 near me and there's only 18, why don't we have a campaign against every single one? So it escalated from me wanting to do something kind of part time locally to maybe we can all work together. Um, and bringing people together to share lessons and troubleshoot ideas and feel less alone, I suppose, in the campaigning. It's just great timing, I suppose, that it was the 100-year anniversary of the racing of greyhounds this year, so it was a good time to be escalating pressure on the tracks, and I think we've done a really good job of that.
Amazing. Great. We're going to go into more detail on that in just a second. Isobel, would you mind introducing yourself and what drives you forward every day?
I am a campaign manager at Animal Aid, which is a nationwide campaigns organisation that campaigns on a range of different issues within the animal rights sphere, including things like the use of animals for food and for animal experiments, but also the use of animals for entertainment, which is my kind of specialist subject here. So I campaign on ending the racing of greyhounds and horses and just animals being used for displays and unethical things like that. And I've just been basically a animal rights activist and campaigner my whole adult life, really. It's something that it was actually on my first day of uni. I went to Manchester Uni and I walked out the front door of the Students' Union and I saw that there was a protest happening across the road. So I went over to see what it was about, and it turned out to be an anti-vivisection protest. And I took a leaflet from the people that were there, and it happened to be an Animal Aid leaflet. So from that day on, I got more involved in animal rights campaigns work. I became a school speaker for Animal Aid and then eventually ended up working for Animal Aid. So yeah, that's kind of how I've ended up here. And I've always felt like quite a strong affinity with animals. I've always recognized their sort of individuality, and their right to just have a nice life that's not governed by what human beings want from them. So that's kind of why I do what I do now.
What keeps you moving forward?
We have to see a lot of horrible things, and a lot of the baddies that we're coming up against are big, powerful baddies. So it is difficult work, but the motivation is the animals. Of course, like I looked out my kitchen window and saw a woman walking 2 greyhounds down the street earlier, and that reminded me of who I'm here for, but also the people that I work with. There's so many awesome people who are all working together now on this, including the people on this call, but also there's a big network of volunteers and activists who are also motivated. And I think we do a really good job of keeping each other going when it gets tough.
Thank you for that. Emily, your turn. Please tell me a bit more about yourself and your journey.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in speaking up for animals, but when I became a sort of teenager to college sort of age, I sort of lost it for a little while and I went into some other jobs. But when the badger cull started in 2013, I got quite angry about it, and David Cameron was my MP at the time. So I started writing to him, started getting involved in fighting against the badger cull, and did a lot of work with the Badger Trust, sort of like arranging marches all around the country and motivating people to come and join us. So I got a lot of experience in that, and I've now been at the League Against Cruel Sports for where I'm a campaigns manager there. We are a 100-year-old charity, and we focus on different aspects of animals that are sort of abused and persecuted for sport. The main one being fox hunting. The greyhound racing hasn't been a priority over the years, but obviously there's a big noise around fox hunting at the moment. We are hoping it's going to finish. So I'm hoping that, well, I know greyhound racing is now becoming a bigger priority for us, which is exciting because over the last 8 years, I have worked on greyhound campaigns, but it's been very ad hoc. We put an ad van out actually outside Hove Track, I think in 2018, and we've worked with some activists. So having Norb come in and really sort of and supporting Norb as well, that's been great because we used to just send some placards, some leaflets to the activists that are outside the stadiums. But now, we're gearing up for a bigger fight now, which is great, and collaborating with everybody else, because that's my thing. I love collaborating, and my motivation is getting the general public to realise how bad greyhound racing is. because in the 90s, I actually went to a greyhound race because it was something that was done with work and work parties. So let's go, let's have a works night out. Let's go to the greyhound races. And I only went once, and I sat there and looked and thought, I don't like this. So I just think a lot of people don't realise. So that's what motivates me. Let's get people knowing about how awful greyhound racing is.
Why now? Why the importance of shutting it down now? Because my understanding is that racetracks are kind of dying down naturally anyway. So why not just leave it to kind of keep going that direction? What's the cost of doing that?
I think the answer to why now is because basically every other day a greyhound is dying on these tracks, even when there are only 15 left. And we're seeing each year that despite attempts by the industry to improve their image, deaths are still increasing, which is kind of shocking when there are fewer and fewer tracks. And I think we can't rely on complacency in this space. Yes, tracks are closing on their own. Yes, there's pressure. Yes, there's declining public support. However, and I think we've all experienced this, when interacting with the public, most people don't realize greyhound racing is happening. And when they do, they're against it. And so the industry, whilst they are in general decline, they're surviving through this ignorance, I suppose. And if we were to just leave them to it, I reckon maybe 5 more tracks would close on their own, but it would get to a point where the industry kind of just sustains itself kind of quietly on the low down to international betting markets, to the streaming services, and would probably solidify itself and continue to fly under the radar. Whereas now in their 100-year where they're trying to celebrate, what they're trying to celebrate, I'm not really sure, 100 years of killing dogs, I suppose. It's a real opportunity to be like, actually, this started in 1926 and it should have stayed in 1926. And this kind of cruelty, this spectacle, this idea of animals as entertainment belongs in the past. And we could let it, slowly continue declining over the next few decades, or we could put our foot down now and say, enough's enough. And I think the political appetite, I think the campaigning organisations, I think we're all aligned in the fact this is a priority. And I think it's a political priority as well. Like, it's banned in Wales, banned in Scotland, it's ending in New Zealand at the end of July. It's under a huge amount of pressure in the United States and Australia. So there's this real zeitgeist, I suppose, at the moment against the racing of greyhounds, unsurprisingly.
Dogs love to run. They just love to run. Why don't you just let them run? What would you say is the difference between running and the oval track?
Yeah, so obviously dogs love to run, but there's a huge difference between taking your dog to a park, throwing a ball, letting them chase the ball, and taking them to an oval track after having been trained to just instinctively go so fast, too fast, essentially, round a track that they can basically ping off at the corners. And this is where we see a lot of falls, we see a lot of injuries. There's an inherent danger that's built into greyhound racing that just simply doesn't exist when you take a dog to the park. Greyhounds are kind of like gangly dogs and goofy dogs sometimes, and they can be clumsy, and silly, which is one of the, they've got all these wonderful qualities that we enjoy when we hang out with them. Like all dogs, they can come to injuries accidentally, but there's a deliberate nature of the way that greyhound racing is set up where there is an increased chance of injury, which the industry finds tolerable and we don't.
Yeah. A lot of people would argue that actually there's more danger outside of a racetrack because it's more controlled.
And that's an argument that we've heard quite a lot. People do often say that, things happen to dogs all the time, but it just doesn't really bear out by reality. When it comes to the intent behind what you're doing as well, a dog might accidentally run into the road, a dog might accidentally stand on a piece of glass. All of these things could happen outside to a dog, but all of those things are accidents. When you are taking a dog to an environment where that environment is likely to cause them harm, that's where it becomes deeply unethical, and especially to do that for the purpose of earning money off the back of the work that dog is doing. And that is just when we analyse what's happening to these dogs on racetracks. There's also a lot that dogs go through outside of the racing environment that is just as horrific. We see dogs that are just trapped in kennels for over 23 hours a day because they are being used for breeding. We see dogs who don't even make it to a racetrack at all, getting dumped because they're never going to be a champion racer. It's a big machine that is churning up dogs and spitting them out, and there's a lot more happening under the surface than anyone really sees on racetracks, and a lot more happening than is reflected in what the industry itself reports. In the work that we've been doing at Animal Aid to uncover what's happening to greyhounds, we've discovered a lot of abandoned dogs. We know that they've come from the racing industry because they have tattoos on their ears, for example. We also seen a lot of dogs who've been killed. Most of the greyhounds who race in England were bred in Ireland, and there's been plenty of investigations over in Ireland that have found killing of dogs on an incredible scale. And these are dogs that we'd never seen in England racing because they never even got that far. And we're talking about really young dogs, puppies being killed because they aren't going to cut it on a racetrack. So there's a lot of sort of like dark and shady things, and just the life of a dog who is being used for breeding is no life at all. It's animals kept essentially in sheds and in kennels and having their puppies taken away from them and not being allowed to run. That's the thing. If we're supposed to be in supporting greyhound racing because dogs love to run, there's a hell of a lot of dogs who are trapped in racing who will never get to run because their job is to be in a kennel, produce puppies, and just be part of that machinery that never gets to see the light of day.
I think it's 95% of the time that they're stuck in kennels.
Yeah.
Following on from Isobel's point about Ireland, we've just released a report called Reaching the Finish Line, which we worked on with Grey to KUSA. And in that, well, I found one of the most shocking figures was that 6,000 dogs just go missing. So it's a horrendous number. So, I think 85% of dogs are bred for racing in Ireland, and then 6,000 of them are missing. And that is just horrendous. Just discarding 6,000 dogs, and they never.
That's wild.
It's just awful. So that report is obviously worth looking at, which is on our website, and I can obviously send you a link to that.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll link that in the show notes.
The main reason for greyhound racing seems to be streaming it to other countries, or to people in this country, but greyhound racing has got wide support of watching it abroad. So it's for money, it's for greed, and it's for gambling. But gambling is dangerous for people as well as dogs. And that's why we've linked up with a charity called Gambin as well. So there are people who've been affected by gambling who are also wanting greyhound racing to end. So we want to protect the humans and we want to protect the dogs. It's a dying industry, and it is just for gambling. It is for human greed.
I was reading that a lot of these track sites tended to be built around the outskirts of towns, and as the population has grown, those tracks are worth a lot of money in property development. So in comparison, I would imagine that that's why a lot of them have been closed down, because they're not making as much money as they would being sold off to property developers, right? So really at the center of it, the dogs are not really the reason, based on my research, that many of them are actually shutting down. They're just not making enough money, and the alternative is making them more.
The financial situation of tracks and the industry is often discussed, especially within the industry, and a lot of people are critical of kind of money being siphoned away from the people who, for lack of a better word, own the greyhounds, train the greyhounds, race the greyhounds, which would be the kind of people in the industry who would be saying, you're taking our jobs, you're taking our livelihoods. Money's being siphoned away from them and given to bigger companies who maybe own the tracks or own the media rights for the streaming, and then obviously as well, absolutely the gambling entities. So what you're saying, kind of the money is being stripped away from the local nature of the tracks and I suppose the individuals involved, and siphoned to big corporations like you'd see, in any number of industries in the system we have. But yeah, the fact there is still money in it is why it continues. And when there's not money in it for these big companies, they have no hesitation closing down the tracks, whether it's to sell for housing or for no reason at all, really, that we saw with Oxford Dog Track and Suffolk Downs Dog Track earlier this year. The streaming, the media group attached to those tracks, SIS, Oxford Dog Track was significantly in debt to them. they were struggling financially anyway. And so they chose to streamline their services by cutting 2 dog tracks from their roster because they pay the tracks for the races essentially, and clearly it wasn't making enough money, and they gave those tracks, I think, something ridiculous like 2 or 3 days notice, if that. And that raised another interesting point because we've got a situation now in Wales where it's banned, there's 1 track left, and there's a conversation about how long until that track can be closed. And the media service for that track is SIS, who just pulled out of a track and closed them in about 3 days. And they're saying, oh no, you need like months, maybe years. And it's all a lie, really. As soon as they're not wanting to, whether it's financial or political reasons, they will pull out without hesitation. And I think it goes to show as well, in the case of like, selling for housing or property development, houses are something we need. It's more socially useful than dog track, which unfortunately they prey on people who are potentially economically vulnerable. There's a reason they exist in the places they do and why they're closing in other places. And we're actually seeing with, for example, Toaster Dog Track, they're looking to redevelop the site into a number of things, including 2 schools, parkland, a kind of a career and business site, more housing, but retaining a lot of that natural environment around there and opening that up to the public. And you can go and look at that as the Toaster. There's a consultation on right now about it. But it's an incredible vision of what these dilapidated, outdated tracks could be. And they can transform from something that services a handful of people a few days a week to something that serves the whole community in an incredibly socially positive and socially useful way. And instead of enticing kids into a gambling environment, you can just have them running through fields and parks and learning in schools that could be built there instead. And so I would encourage, any business still involved in this, that's the way to go. And to be honest, it's probably also more profitable for them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I was reading annual investor notes, and just no mention of greyhounds whatsoever. I was just like really shocked, actually. I was really hoping someone would have said something about it, but I think there was like 1 sentence and nobody really cared. But yeah, I'm curious to know what you think people are missing about greyhound racing, the people who are still supporting it. Because the memories we have as children of going to these places, hanging out with family members, they're all happy, the adults are happy, everyone's having fun, right? And then you yourself become an adult and you think about memories that made you happy. If going to the racetrack was one of those particular core memories, that will be really, really like deeply tied to, your sense of, I guess, happiness. What do you think those people are missing about greyhound racing today? So you've got the emotional attachment, right? But that disconnects from the reality. So how do we build a bridge so that people can make a connection?
I think it's outreach, isn't it? And letting people know what actually happens. Like that we said earlier, the kennel situation, how these dogs live outside the track as well. So they're at risk on the track. The kennels they can live in. So a head of campaigns a few years ago went to Hillside Kennels and the dogs left there on I think it was the Sunday, and he went there 5 days later and the smell was horrendous. There were scratch marks all around the sort of like on the brickwork in these tiny kennels. There was wood all being chewed. There was bits of metal sticking out. And he had 2 greyhounds himself that were rescued from the industry. So he did know a lot about it, but he was absolutely horrified when he went in there. The smell was awful. And that video is on YouTube, actually, and it is really, really shocking. So I think people just don't know. I never knew about that. So it was just the way the dogs were left there. That's how they lived. So, the site was sold because I think he moved on to new kennels. I'd have to I'd have to double check that. But he wasn't evicted or anything. He just moved. And so somebody went in after, and it was just awful. So I'm sure that's not just a one-off. Norb mentioned earlier about that trainer. He had some greyhounds off. And that case, like he said, was a big one. So it's just not one person that's doing it.
It's a system.
Yeah.
If I can jump in on that question as well, I think just to broaden out to a wider cultural issue, I think we're raised to care and respect animals, but there are kind of 2 underlying assumptions in society that still exist, unfortunately. And these are assumptions that I think is really important that we resist and undermine. The first is that animals exist for us, not with us, and that allows us to use them, whether it's for entertainment, racing, or even in our food system. And the second assumption linked to the first is that as long as we treat the animals well enough, we can do what we want with them. And this second assumption is often propped up by lies and marketing and comfortable lies we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better. And they absolutely exist. Emily mentioned some of them there, like, almost looking away when something's wrong and pretending that it's just one bad apple when actually it's a systemic thing, because the uncomfortable reality or the uncomfortable conclusion of accepting maybe it's systemic is I shouldn't be supporting that. And so it's easier to believe it's just one bad apple, the greyhounds are well looked after. If one of them falls, that's really rare. And, maybe they've got back up again and finished the race. And these are lies that those in the industry probably repeat to themselves until they believe. That's why at every stage we need to be resisting this assumption that animals exist for us, because they don't. They exist with us. And in the cases of animals in our care, which is usually in this world our companions, cats, dogs, other small animals, we have a huge responsibility to them. And unfortunately, in the racing industry, they are failed systematically, whether that's being kept in kennels, which is an entirely inappropriate place for any animal. It's essentially a cage, or being raced on a dangerous track. It's the same problem.
Yeah, I would agree. I saw a video yesterday on social media of a galgo that was rescued. I think it was Galgo del Sol or Project Galgo. And the poor dog was chained for 10 years. 10 years with this tiny little, meter long radius for movement for 10 years. And then today I was thinking about greyhound racing. That's no different, in a cage. One is attached by its neck and the other one is in a kennel, but the quality of life is probably quite similar. What fascinated me was the cognitive dissonance, because that level of cruelty only happens abroad. But actually we have that happening here. We've taught ourselves to stop seeing, And then the irony is we're seeing more than ever. Because there's so much in our face all the time. It's crazy. That's more of an observation. So let's zoom out. Walk me through the life of a greyhound, like what happens in greyhound breeding and then birth and then, various stages.
Well, there was some AI research, some research by a scientist that came out this week, and I would have to look at the statistics. I can't remember. I don't know if either of you can, about the sires. There's not many sires of these dogs.
I don't remember them off the top of my head. I can get them up really quickly.
Yeah.
You are right. The research that just came out was basically the life of a greyhound is shrouded in secrecy and a lack of transparency. And yeah, there are very few sires.
The gene pool is very narrow. Yeah.
What does the data say?
Yeah, so this was an AI analysis that was done recently, and it did an analysis on 31,028 dogs who were raced in GBGB regulated racing between 2022 and 2026. And those 31,028 dogs were bred from only 772 sires. So that's a very, very small gene pool. And that was across, there were more dams, more mothers, obviously, because you need to do the entire gestation and birthing with the dams. But yeah, it's a very, very small amount of male genetic material that's going into that breeding pool.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? This is the bit that I find really interesting, because I've seen this at Crufts as well. You've got dogs who've sired, 1 year and a half old and already sired like 40 litters. And you just think, okay, well, that dog's not going to naturally select to do that. So what's the procedure here? And is it consensual? Unlikely.
Yeah, stud dog doesn't have a good life having to perform that function over and over and over again. So then, yeah, they're not getting to choose who they mate with, and it's a very sort of artificial and imposed process on them. And also those mothers aren't choosing who they mate with either. So there's a significant amount of trauma that's being inflicted upon those dogs when they're being used for breeding.
Yeah, which most likely would transfer through stress hormones to the pups as well. So it's kind of like a cycle that...
It's not just the fact of it happening, it's in the environment of noisy, often unhygienic kennels, and then the mother has to give birth and raise the pups in that environment whilst having been through that trauma, and that process being repeated over and over and over again. For many dogs, it's a really horrific existence.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind, right? Isn't it wild how we've normalized these things? But then also, why is it that most of the greyhounds are bred in Ireland, do you think?
It's got a historic element to it, and there's also connections to other pursuits such as hare coursing and things that are done with the same dogs. But I think it's a lot easier to do that.
I think it's a case of that's just how it's always been. And so the best greyhounds, so to speak, are coming from Ireland. The industry in England hasn't really gone to a huge amount of effort to change the status quo because it's so easy to get the dogs from Ireland. In Ireland, they benefit from potentially less regulation as well, which is why we've got a situation where they breed so many dogs and they can discard them so easily. So Emily was right before referring to the RT investigation where it found every year 6,000 puppies were being discarded before even making it into the industry. And an interview just a few months ago with the kind of the head of the industry over there was almost bragging and saying they'd got the number down to around half of that, but there's still 3,000 puppies at a minimum being discarded. So if they're able to discard that many, how many are they breeding? So I think it's just they benefit from the existing system they've got over there and also the lack of accountability and the things they get away with. And it's so easy to bring a dog in the racing industry over here and sell them for quite a lot of money. And some people in the industry actually do lament the fact that the greyhounds come from Ireland because it makes them very reliant on the continuation in Ireland, which isn't given. But if greyhound racing were to end in Ireland tomorrow, that would have massive repercussions for racing in England. So there's the security element, but they're held a little bit of ransom. But it also means the Irish trainers and owners can keep the dogs they want, which will generally be quite fast. And it's why when we see big competitions like at Dunstall Park, the Irish trainers are dominating, and the Irish dogs are dominating even English competitions. So I imagine, yeah, there's a number of factors why it continues, but just because it's the way it's always been and it's easier to do bad things and get away with it.
At what age do they tend to be taken away from their mums and litter mates? And then what does the journey look like from Ireland to England?
Well, I mean, this is part of the challenge of the lack of transparency is that it's incredibly hard to know. The industry like to say things like how good greyhounds' early years are in terms of they're left with the mum, which potentially in the puppy breeding industry, they'd be separated quite early and sold. But, can they prove it? Can we see it? It's impossible to verify. And it doesn't change the fact that they're growing up in kennels, not in homes, and far younger than they should be. They're trained and put onto tracks. And actually, some of the dogs we've seen killed this year already in England haven't even been 2 years old. And the study Emily mentioned before by Mia Cobb that came out, I think it was only Tuesday of this week, it shows that a lot of greyhounds will race for only a few months, very few race for 3 years, and an exceptionally small number race beyond that. And so they have basically this kind of their puppies and then they're raced for not very long. They might have an injury or they might be killed, but those that do survive, they will be either, and this is where we do know a bit more because it's English stats and English, again, lack of transparency, but we do have at least the numbers. And we know that roughly 6,000 dogs leave the industry each year. About 5% of them will leave dead. About half of them will be given up for adoption and sent to like rescues or charities like the Greyhound Trust, who are just an extension of the industry, but that's another story. Battersea Dogs Home, RSPCA, whoever ends up with them, that's half of them. And, these dogs could be as young as 2, 3, or 4. And so they've lived a fraction of their life. And the people who brought them into the world have just rescinded complete responsibility for them. And they're expecting a member of the public to come along and pick up the pieces essentially. And it is picking up the pieces because you're picking up any trauma, you're picking up any injuries, in some cases illnesses. We've got someone involved in one of our campaigns who has a rescue dog, and I don't think she'll mind me talking about this because she does. It's Roma the Crybaby on Instagram. She came from the racing industry with illness, I suppose, that affects their eyes that they had their whole life and it went untreated. And when she got Roma, she mentioned it to the rescue, the person they came from, who I believe was attached to the industry. And they were like, well, you can give her back if you don't want her. But it wasn't a case of like, complaining. It was a case of what's wrong. And they just had no idea.
How did no one pick up on it? Yeah.
And maybe they did, and maybe they just didn't care. So the life of the greyhound is one of like severe neglect whilst they're in the industry, and then complete abandonment of responsibility. And I would also like to touch on that only covers, like 60% of the greyhounds. So what's happening to the others? So if we know 5% are dead, around half being given up for adoption in shelters, what's happening to the others? And what we're seeing is some will be used for breeding, absolutely, but an increasing number are being retained by the owners slash trainers in the industry themselves. And that's because of an absence of homes. It's incredibly hard to home dogs full stop at the moment in the UK. And if they're already overloading sanctuaries with an extra 3,000 odd dogs each year, which they are, some of these dogs will sit in those rescues for a year or two. Look at any rescue, I challenge you right now, and you'll see a dog who hasn't raced in 2 or 3 years. So there's just not space for them. So they're being kept. And what the industry would like you to believe, retained by owner, means is they're going home to live on, this friendly trainer's sofa. But the reality is they're going back to the kennels they spent their whole lives. And whereas before they'd have had, depending on how you frame it, at least the brief respite of going to a racetrack, which was at least some variation to their routine in their life. These ones wouldn't even be leaving for that, and they wouldn't be leaving for any training. They would be essentially more neglected because there's no need to socialize them, and they're essentially just there because they've got nowhere else to go because the industry are under greater scrutiny and they can no longer kill them. So what we've seen is the number of dogs killed going down slightly, not on the track, killed away from the track going down slightly, and the number being retained in kennels going up significantly. So yeah, the lucky dogs get dumped in a shelter and hopefully rehomed, but a significant number don't even get that.
I think they give them an extremely minimal cost to rescue, if any. And so it's the public that ends up paying for the greyhounds, like Norb's friend and the rescue centres, which are already bursting. So it's just a complete lack of responsibility.
The industry give themselves such a big pat on the back for abandoning thousands of dogs upon rescues, whereas we all know, like we've all got it in our heads, the phrase that a dog is for life, not just for Christmas. We all understand that because we all understand that it is morally wrong to just give up and abandon a dog when they no longer suit your purpose. Whereas this industry is doing this to dogs in their thousands every year and they're getting away with it. And that's something that we really need to challenge.
And what age do they start training and when do they start racing typically?
Yeah, it's really young, isn't it?
It is young. Yeah, I think in England they can't race. I think I saw a dog racing at 13 or 14 months recently. And whenever a dog dies who hasn't made the age of 2, I always post it as 1-year-old dog. And the industry hate that and they always come back and they're like, dogs can't race at 1. They have to race at like 14 or 15 months. I'm like, that's not much different. And if they're not yet 2, they're 1. You can fiddle with the months and numbers however you like, but they're essentially 1 year old and a few months. And so yeah, they race quite young.
And they don't generally get past at least 5. I mean, and you think about how old a greyhound can get up to in with us, 15 years old, I think is the expected lifespan for greyhounds. But, that's a shocker, isn't it? That these dogs are dying, 10, 8 years before they even should.
Duna, my dog, is turning 8 next month. She only came to me last year, so she was about 7.5. I discovered after I got her that she had a problem with her gait, which nobody had picked up on. And it turned out 10 months later that she has lumbar sacral disease, which probably explains why she was given up by her galguero, like her owner. So yeah, it's crazy to me how the value of their life is only linked to how valuable they can be, commercially speaking. What are some of the rebuttals or some of the things people have said with regards to the arguments against you or against shutting down these racetracks?
We do get this, if you end greyhound racing, then we'll kill all the dogs kind of thing, which I find it's a remarkable claim from people who also claim that they love these dogs like they're their own children. So it's very strange to be on one hand saying these dogs are my children and I love them, but if I can no longer profit from them, I will murder them immediately, is a bit of a odd imbalance. So yeah, that's just like a desperate attempt not to take responsibility for your own practices. So we get threats to kill dogs. We get a lot of things. There's the government have responded to our request for a ban by saying that the industry is well regulated, but more and more evidence that we're coming across all the time spells out that that's just not the case. So that study that was published earlier this week using the AI analysis has pointed to various different ways in which the industry, which is allowed to regulate itself. There is not an independent regulator that oversees what they do. The Greyhound Board of Great Britain is its own regulator, and the AI study that was released earlier this week has found that they are hiding a lot of the reality. So they're not being accountable for what their practices are. So that's obviously not well regulated. They also, as their own regulator, they are allowed to investigate and rule upon any kind of malpractice within the industry themselves. So this comes down to things like multiple cases in which dogs have been found with cocaine in their systems. It's like a well-known doping substance, and the industry investigates this themselves. They always find that this cocaine has just happened to enter the dog system accidentally through some kind of cross-contamination, and fine is a few £100s to the trainer that's allowed this to happen, and the dogs can continue racing, the trainers can continue training. There's no real repercussions for these horrendous things happening to dogs. Imagine how scary it must feel to be a dog who's been doped with cocaine, to have sensations of a drug like that going through your body and having no understanding why. There's no justice for these dogs when the industry is allowed to regulate itself. So the claim that it's a well-regulated industry is just falling flat time and time again.
I can throw in two very common rebuttals that have kind of come up a little bit in this call. The one of their favorites is dogs love to race, and it's so hard to come back to because dogs love to run, but how can they have a concept of like a race when they don't even know where the finish line is? They're not put in a trap, and often if you watch the videos of them being put in the traps at the beginning of the race, it's not a very pleasant experience for them. They're often lifted in, forced in, and generally don't look like they're loving life. The traps come up, there's a mechanical hare, and it's all preying on their prey drive. And also, I suppose, anything reinforced by their training as well. And they just run as fast as they can. And often we'll see them fall or get injured. And I've seen their legs snap, and they'll keep running because they're on adrenaline and the pure instinct and drive. And there's nothing in that that's like gives the idea that, you know, they're loving life, except for the fact that maybe when they're taken out of their kennels and taken to the track, it's a new environment and it might be a little bit exciting. So I always say, you know, they love to run, absolutely, but they don't have any concept of racing, and you can't say they love to race with any authority or evidence. And you also often see them referring to them as athletes. And I can't think of, with the exception of horses, which even then, you know, the horse racing industry is different in terms of there's a jockey on their back. And I don't hear horses referred to as athletes so much. But regardless, with the exception of the racing of horses, name me one other industry where in England alone, an athlete is dying whilst competing every 2 or 3 days. And I'll find you an industry that will be shut down tomorrow, because that is criminal. And it would be making headline front page news if that were the case. But the reality for these dogs is it doesn't even make a sentence in an article when a dog falls unless it's in a major competition. And so we know just off past statistics that a dog dies every roughly 2 or 3 days. That means we're halfway through the year. So we're looking at upwards of 50 dogs will have already been killed on tracks this year, and potentially more, because there's some rumours going around at the moment within the industry that quite a few tracks are churning out serious injuries and deaths. Hove is a good example, and Hove's not raced yesterday and has had interrupted races last few days because of the traps going wrong. Toaster is under fire for killing dogs. One of the lead trainers at Toaster has had 2 dogs killed in just the last few months. And the latest to come under fire is Peel Grange, which has also seen at least 2 dogs killed. But we don't know their names. We don't know who they were, which race it was. We don't know anything because the industry don't publish that. And you can be sure if this was an athlete, a genuine athlete running in a race, and they fell and broke their leg or their hip and they were killed, we would know about it and there would be outcry. And so yeah, there's no justification for it. And I think even the industry know it's wrong because they hide the replays in races where there are serious incidents. So we've not mentioned this before, but we've got a team of nearly 50 volunteers now watching every single race that happens in England. And so far this year, we discovered over 700 dogs have already fallen. So that's multiple dogs falling a day. Some of those dogs haven't raced since. And we're trying our best to identify like which dogs are successfully being rehomed and which are never seen again. And it's incredibly hard to do because the industry, whilst they know themselves and they take the data and internalize it, there's no way to hold them accountable. And so we're relying on people coming forward and saying, which they do. We do have people coming forward from within the industry and saying, that dog, they died. And so we saw an incident recently at Romford where a dog raced, they won the race and they collapsed and had a seizure. We witnessed that, but it also happened to a dog at Monmore Dog Track earlier this year. Exact same circumstances. That dog was killed, but you don't even see it on camera because the camera pans away. And so there's a huge amount of secrecy and a huge lack of transparency that enables what is criminal and should be criminal and what would be criminal if it were done to any other athlete.
Yeah, and also the doping, right? Because if it was, I don't know, the Tour de France or whatever, that would be scandalous. But for some reason, it's okay with dogs who don't even consent to taking it in the first place.
And to put that into perspective as well, because the industry, they'll come back and say, oh, no, they test for that now and it doesn't happen.
So that's the system. And also, I guess it justifies why it's okay for them to just take the slap on the wrist but continue doing it. Wild. Totally wild. How can someone love a dog and be part of the thing that breaks them?
They can't.
Can't even imagine it. I mean, I'm asking that question as well. How can people do that? Because, I can see your dog lying on the sofa. You give a greyhound an option of racing around a track or a sofa, and they'd probably choose a sofa. And my dog's here lazing on the sofa, and I would never put my dog at risk. Think, oh, I'll enter it for a race. Oh, it might have an injury and it might get killed. I love my dog too much to ever do that to it. To her. So I just don't understand the mentality of it. I don't know if Norb and Isobel have got anything. I just really can't understand it at all.
I think some people are potentially a little bit institutionalized with it. There are trainers and stuff that are out there who parents did this and grandparents did this, and they've never, because they've been raised with it, they've not questioned it critically. But that's not love, is it? Just going along with the status quo and watching animals get hurt and live in horrific conditions. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not love.
So my answer would go back to what I was saying before about these assumptions we live by, that it's okay to use animals. And I would say the people in the industry justify how they treat the dogs and doing what they do to the dogs, which ultimately breaks them, and claiming to love them the same way people claim to love animals and eat them. It's this kind of underlying societal assumption that as long as they've lived a good life, they're okay to use. And potentially that, that might ruffle some feathers. But I think we should look critically at these things, because what Isobel was saying there, like, how can you do something that harms and ultimately doesn't benefit them at all? And it's the same with our food system. We eat animals who live a fraction of their lives and end up in slaughterhouses where, halal or otherwise, because there's a lot of debate at the moment, they don't die happy. I can guarantee you that. And I think it's the same mentality, unfortunately.
So, the march.
Yeah, so this July is the 100th anniversary of greyhound racing in the UK, and it's been 100 years too many. So on the 25th of July, we are gathering in London to march to demand an end to greyhound racing.
And we're meeting at 11:30 at Knight Rider Court, which is just over the road from St. Paul's Cathedral. And so, yeah, please do come down, march with us, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to speak up for the greyhounds and finally earn them their freedom.
So the League Against Cruel Sports is fully backing Shutdown and Animal Aid at this march, and we're encouraging all our supporters to come along and be a voice for these poor dogs that have to race around these oval tracks and face death and injury every time they go out there. So please come along and join us.
We're meeting at One Night Rider Court because that's where the Greyhound Board of Great Britain offices are. They're the self-regulating body for the industry. They're the same ones who hide and justify the deaths of these greyhounds that happen routinely each week in the industry.
And what are you hoping to achieve with that?
We'll be marching from those offices to Parliament Square to put political pressure on the government to follow in the footsteps of Scotland and Wales and finally ban this cruel industry.
If greyhound racing ended, what would life look like for greyhounds instead?
Nice, happy lives.
Yeah, if greyhound racing ended, this actually comes back to one of the what rebuttals we get, because a lot of people say that if greyhound racing ended, then there'd be no such thing as greyhounds anymore, which is just ridiculous. Greyhounds are one of the oldest breeds of dogs in the world. There were records of greyhounds back 4,000 years ago. So yeah, greyhounds would, in the absence of racing, which has only existed for 100 years, be able to just be dogs again. That's the vision that we've got for greyhounds. We want them to live lives like other dogs get to live.
That desire to stretch their legs full beam.
We want greyhounds to be able to do big stretches and do big runs around the park and laze around on the sofa with their legs in the air and do all the things that we know they really want to do, rather than run around an oval track.
Yeah. You talk to people who've rescued a greyhound, and they'll tell you exactly what wonderful lives they're living, being rescued and not raced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're such unique and beautiful characters. And I've been lucky enough to have a greyhound in my home, and I'm hoping to adopt one for good soon. But they deserve the freedom to choose how they spend their time, whether it's curled up on a sofa or whether it's running around in the park with other dogs on their own. They deserve that freedom of choice that they don't get in the racing industry when they're confined to a kennel and only taken out to race around a dangerous track. And yeah, I want to see more greyhounds being cheeky and mischievous and silly and goofy and just living and loving and sometimes being a bit of a nuisance.
Because you just think years and years of suppressing that, right?
Yeah, she was tied up in a rubbish dump in Shanghai for a year when she was a puppy. I don't know if you can see her now.
Oh my gosh.
So she's a Labrador mixed with a Retriever. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, she looks very cute and comfortable. In the context of greyhounds, what do you wish more people would understand about greyhounds specifically?
I would like them to meet more greyhound owners like you. Yeah. Well, I just think greyhounds are misrepresented by the greyhound industry. Like we've spoken about before, they say they're born to race. I think meet some greyhounds and then find out exactly what they want to do. They've all got personalities. They're all individuals. They're not just a dog for racing. They're a dog for families and individuals, not just to be used as a machine.
I think echoing Emily, I think a lot of dogs and animals in general would benefit from people not putting their expectations on them. And someone who runs a sanctuary said this to me once. They said they fell into the mistake of putting expectations, and they had a cow who when they rehabilitated the cow, they were like, the cow's going to go live with the cows. The cow didn't want to live with the other cows, but it's the expectation we put on them. And I think we put expectations, like Emily said, on these dogs to love to race, but leave them alone and see what they do. And my experience with greyhounds, when you leave them be and they've got no pressures or otherwise, they want cuddles, they want sofas, and they definitely don't want to be running, and they definitely don't want to be in the rain. But yeah, that's my experience.
That's accurate. That's my experience as well.
I think dog guardians all understand that the dogs that they share their home with are really special and unique individuals who all have their own quirks and sensitivities. And I wish everyone just understood that that's exactly the same for greyhounds as well. And they have all the same rights that every dog should have.
Agree. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that Duna does as well. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Norb. Bye, Isobel. Bye, Emily. Bye.
Cheers.